o'clock on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's time for Wednesday's edition of Cross Question. Don't forget, Cross Question Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday nights now on LBC at 8 o'clock. Let me introduce you to my panel. Joining us on the panel today is Rory Stewart, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, the comedian Geoff Norcott, who's got a very good book out at the moment, as I'm sure he'll be telling you multiple times during the programme. Peter Tatchell, the human rights campaigner, is here too. And Nadine Batchelor-Hunt, the journalist and broadcaster, is joining us here on the programme to answer your questions. The number to call, you should know it by now, 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to the panel. And of course, don't forget you can watch us also on Global Player on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, the LBC YouTube channel, Facebook or Twitter feeds as well. Well, let's get cracking with our first question.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to Rob in the West Midlands. Hi, Rob. What's your question, please?
Hi, Iain. Is the government's education catch-up fund enough to fill the gap in lost learning during the pandemic?
Well, £1.4 billion is what it amounts to. There were calls for £15 billion from Sir Kevin Collins, the government's COVID recovery advisor on education. He's resigned this afternoon over it. Let's go to Peter Tatchell first. Peter, what do you make of this?
Well, quite clearly, the amount being offered is way below even the government's own estimates of what would be required. I think they were talking at one point about £10 billion. So this is really, yet again, young people, the future generations, being let down. And if we want to have a productive economy and an effective, efficient society, we need to train young people in the skills and talents and qualifications they need to fulfill that role. And it's very clear from me, from friends that I have with kids, that these young people are lagging behind and that they need extra help to catch up. And it's an obvious, very clear, positive investment for the future. So I would not begrudge the money at all.
Geoff Norcott, you've got an interesting perspective on this, I suspect. I think you've been a teacher, haven't you?
Well, you know, a rare right-winger in comedy, a rare right-winger in teaching. And look, I think one thing I'd say to the government in this instance is ask yourself a question. Is if Marcus Rashford intervenes, are we going to completely change our mind? If the answer is yes, then maybe change your mind now and save yourself doing an embarrassing U-turn. Look, I am cautious about, there's so much money being spent and it will have to be repaid at some point. But if you look at this figure and compare it to what they're spending in the likes of the United States and the Netherlands, it doesn't really compare very well. Has there ever been a time when the teaching profession has said, yeah, absolutely, that's enough money? Not really, but it does seem like this is falling short of even the bottom end expectations.
So you're expecting a U-turn at some point?
Well, I mean, I think Boris Johnson's already said, this isn't it. No, there'll be more coming. So I think even that is a noise that suggests that there will be more. But whether or not it can get up to the sort of levels that would keep the teaching profession happy. And look, I think that it was quite clear that disadvantaged children were hit the hardest by the lockdown. And we knew that. And that's what made it so galling when we went into a second lockdown and we shut the schools again, because we already knew that disadvantaged children were suffering at home harder and they were suffering in the classroom harder. But look, that's done. But what we really need to do now is try and do the best that we can to make it up to those kids in particular.
Yeah,
I think what we learned from that answer, Geoff, is that you are no Matt Ford in Boris impressions. But there we go. Rory Stewart, what do you make of this?
So, I guess the key thing is that these billions are very confusing for anybody. I mean, how are we supposed to know as the public whether 1 billion or 15 billion is the right amount? But if you break it down per head, the Zara has calculated that we're looking at this about £22 per head per child in a primary school. If that's correct, and I guess it is, because the Education Czar has produced that figure, we can see that's a pretty small amount of money. And there are a lot of children in schools. So if we're really trying to make a huge difference, we're trying to make up for a year and a half of lost education, really trying to provide significant extra tuition, extra hours, longer days. And, there'll be people who question whether they want to do that. But if we are, we're going to have to put much, much more money behind this.
And you know the characters involved in this. You know Gavin Williamson, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. It seems to me that Gavin Williamson, as the Education Secretary, has no political capital to spend. It seems that Rishi Sunak he's in charge of the nation's purse strings, and in a way the Chancellor's got to spend money wisely. But given the U-turns that Geoff referred to with Marcus Rashford over free school meals, it doesn't take an Einstein of a political strategist, or even Dominic Cummings, to work out that the consequences of this, if they do have to do a U-turn and the money goes up from, say, 1.5 to 7, 8, 9, 10 billion, that's catastrophic from a PR point of view, isn't it?
You would have thought so, Iain, but of course we've got a government that sort of jumps the shark. It's amazing what they've survived. The fact that the Prime Minister's kind of closest advisor and chief of staff, who worked for him for 18 months, explained over 7 hours absolutely everything that was wrong with him, and it seems to have had very little impact on the opinion polls, suggests that this is a government that can do any number of U-turns and changes without fundamentally changing people's views. It's, I think that if you were going to be a competent government, put PR aside, you'd start by trying to think about what you're trying to achieve here. Do you or do you not believe in the idea that you're going to have to do something different to make up for all the hours that have lost? If you really believe in that, if you really want to turn around children's lives and do something over the next 3 years to make up for what they've lost, you've got to spend much, much more money. What worries me, actually, in a way, you use the word PR, is that kind of sum of money is just about enough for a press release, but it's not really going to make the big fundamental difference in children's education.
Nadine Batchelor-Hunt, the IFS put out some figures today showing that the United States is spending an average of £1,600 per child on post-COVID recovery education, the Netherlands £2,200 per child, and the UK not, as Kevin Collins has said, £22, but £50, so nearly double. But these figures, I think to most people, will seem incomprehensible, how we as the fifth largest economy in the world can be spending £50 when neighbours over the North Sea, the Netherlands, are spending £2,200.
Well, this is, I think, part of a broader issue. I feel there's a bit of a false economy going on when it comes to what we're spending money on. You can't educate kids and tackle inequality on the cheap. It costs money. We need the investment there. And also, just from an economic perspective, the better trained, the better educated people are, the better the British economy will do. And I think also more broadly, talking about the stimulus in the United States, I think today data was out saying the United States are going to have far less economic scarring long term following Biden's stimulus versus the UK, who I think, if I recall correctly, is going to have some of the heaviest scarring in the G7. So I think this is just demonstrative of a broader issue of trying to do things on the cheap. It doesn't work, it causes issues, and our children deserve better than £50 a head, because the damage, the long-term damage that COVID has the potential to cause, which has been spoken a lot about, particularly by people on the right who have been opposing heavy lockdown restrictions, etc. These things need money invested into them, and I am concerned that we're going to have a lost generation of kids whose futures are being done on the cheap almost by the government.
But on the other hand, £15 billion, if we were talking in normal times, we would be thinking, wow, that is a hell of a lot of money. But of course, when you compare it to what the government spend on furlough, it doesn't seem a lot of money to people. And so it's quite easy to say, oh, well, let's spend a bit more here, a bit more there, because virtually every sector in our society and the economy could justify having some sort of injection. Do we not worry about the effect of returning inflation if the government continues to spend money in the way that it has done over the past 18 months? Rory, you're nodding your head there.
Can I come in here? Because, obviously, I'm a huge admirer of Iain's, but sometimes when we engage with each other, I'm sort of characterised as being a kind of guardian lefty. But on this stuff,
surely not.
I think I'm more right-wing than the government. I think we should be more careful with our spending. And I come from a tradition in the Conservative Party, which was basically the David Cameron tradition, which was socially liberal, but economically quite conservative. We were quite cautious about spending and tried to control debt and deficit. It is very, very strange, the extent to which the government is spending on an enormous amount. Not oddly on things I'd be spending on. If you were looking for cuts, for example, I wouldn't be spending an enormous amount on aircraft carriers. I don't think aircraft carriers are the future of war. I'm afraid that they're a very outdated, incredibly expensive technology that has almost no relevance to modern warfare. but not spending on things which it's very difficult to disagree with, like trying to help children catch up on the learning that they've lost over the last year and a half.
But as someone once said, to govern is to choose. Every government gets elected on a manifesto saying what they're going to do. Obviously, they tick and tack on the way. But Geoff Norcott, you self-describe as somebody on the right, but you have a few lefty tendencies. Does that extend to spending money?
I've softened over the years, Ian. There's me, caring about
Haven't
kids.
we all?
We all have our weak moments, but I just think, for me, in a way, I guess it's like a practical thing, isn't it? I think what happened with the free school meals thing was that they tried to not do it. They were put under pressure by Marcus Rashford, and they did it. So they kind of got all the negatives of being perceived to have not having done it, and none of the positives of making that decision in the long run. So I just think, just on a real politic level, it's worth looking at the long-term sort of future for this discussion and thinking, are we going to back down? If so, do it now. But in terms of being left and right on economics, that Overton window has moved for now. And I think it's reasonable. If you look at the countries that you've mentioned, like the USA and the Netherlands, I think it's okay to look at those countries and see how we compare against them. I mean, I know that the government said that there was 100 million hours. It's great when you get the total figure, 100 million hours of tuition. But what does that break down to? And I've got to say, in terms of extending the school day, absolutely terrible idea. That is all that will happen is you'll divide the effort and attention that people have over a longer period. And that's true both of teachers and pupils. It's possibly one of the worst ideas I've ever heard.
But if you're not going to do that, what do you do? I mean, how are you going to enable kids who maybe have lost out over the last year to come back? Surely it does mean that shorter school holidays and longer days. What's the alternative?
No, I think
Can I take the issue?
I think tuition is meaningful.
Hang on, Peter. Let Geoff reply and I'll come to you next.
Just for clarity, I think tuition is meaningful, tutoring is really helpful, but a blanket extension of the school day till 4:30, you're going to just have tired teachers leaving the profession and kids not showing up.
Peter.
I think what we're talking about is an investment in young people's future. We do not want to create a lost generation, alienated and disillusioned. We need an educated new generation for our economic future. So it's a sensible investment. Now, there is money there. There's plenty of money there. We could close tax avoidance loopholes, which would probably bring in an extra 20 to 30 billion pounds a year. We could work with other countries to close down tax havens, which are depriving governments across the world of nearly $1 trillion every year. We could also introduce a wealth tax on the very, very rich. I mean, if there was a wealth tax of, say, an average of 20% on people with assets of £10 million or more, and obviously that would be maybe only 1 or 2% on people with 10 million, but maybe 20%, the full 20% on multi-billionaires, that could potentially raise, as a one-off tax on assets, that could potentially raise £400 billion. That would cover the entire cost, or pretty much the entire cost, of the government's COVID programme. Now, I think that's the way we need to think. And I think,
that's what Jeremy Corbyn said, and the electorate rejected that programme, didn't they?
Well, a lot of millionaires and billionaires are now saying they are willing and want to pay more tax because they realise that actually getting the economy right, getting the country back to work, creating people with spending power is the key to economic revival. If we don't give poorer people the chance to spend, they haven't got money to spend, therefore the businesses they would have spent the money on won't be there. And businesses creating jobs depend on consumers having money to spend.
Can I just come in behind that?
No. Nadine has been gagging to get in.
I just wanted to pick up on what Geoff said. I also think extending the school day isn't a good idea. I think from a perspective of also people that may have kids that have learning disabilities or things like ADHD, forcing them to sit in classrooms longer during the day, I don't think it's going to help their education. I think what needs to happen is what should have happened over the last decade and more is smaller class sizes. So, you know, kids get the tuition that they need. There's a reason why a lot of kids in the private sector get better education, and that's because they have smaller class sizes, they get more attention from the teachers, it's more streamlined to what they need. And I think this is the kind of stuff we should be investing in if we want the education to be better for young people. Simply just sitting kids in a classroom for half an hour longer, an hour longer at the end of every day, I really don't think is going to get down to the structural issues we have in this country, which are very severe. And I know that, Rory, you know, you with your record with David Cameron's government, etc., but the austerity and the cuts have made quite some long-term damage, and it didn't just start with COVID. So I think we need to have a rethink of education in this country, particularly, you know, things like class sizes.
Right, let's go back to our caller, Rob. Rob, what do you think? You're a teacher.
Well, I agree with most of what the panellists said. We clearly had an educational attainment gap for years, and I fear it's got wider with COVID. I think two things with this funding: it should be targeted at those that are most vulnerable in most deprived areas, because clearly that's going to be working. And also, we need to think about improving funding for mental health and improving well-being of students, because that's been affected the most during COVID. And I fear kind of just putting money at catch-up is not just the answer.
OK, Rob, thank you very much. Chris has tweeted to say no mention by the panel of the lost therapies and support for children with special needs during the pandemic. Some of the most vulnerable who already face hurdles gaining employment need proper catch-up help. Well, do tweet and text in your comments, and I'll read out as many as I can. And also, let's have some more questions on 0345 6060 973. It's 8:20 on LBC. Keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973. Some tweets. Rory, you might get a free meal at Wesley's Food Den. He says, I like Rory, the Tory Prime Minister that we never got. A couple of comments on Geoff. David says, Geoff always looks like that teacher who sees right through the BS excuse you have for not doing your homework. And Ed says, if that guy you've got on really was a teacher, then I'm the nabob of Bunipar. His first comments were classic. Well, you know, he then drops Gloppelstots for England. No wonder our school's in such a state. It's all your fault, Geoff.
Well, the good news for that guy is that I was an English teacher as well, so I'm sure he'll be delighted to hear that.
I should point out that Geoff's new book is called Where Did I Go Right? How the Left Lost Me. Rory Stewart is here, Peter Tatchell is here, Nadine Batchelor-Hunt is here too, and so is Sandra in Boreham Wood. Sandra, hi, what's your question, please?
Hi, good evening. Was Tim Martin of Wetherspoon right to suggest that the government should make it easier for young Europeans to come to the UK to work?
Rory Stewart.
Well, look, it's true that the entire hospitality industry has been very, very dependent on Europeans, and particularly true in London. I mean, London, nearly 85% of the economy is services, and a lot of that is face-to-face services. Look at the West End, theatres, restaurants, which bring in billions of pounds to the British economy, hugely dependent on people coming in from Europe. And, you know, my local area of Scotland, hotels really struggling to recruit at the moment. Same is true in many areas of the Lake District. I think the irony, of course, is, the Wetherspoon's owner was a prominent backer of Brexit. But I think the basic point that a lot of the parts of our economy depend on European labour is the point that we have tried to make again and again. And I think it also is relevant for a lot of farming in East Anglia.
Isn't part of the issue here, when Tim Martin says make it easier for young Europeans to come to the UK to work, what he surely should be saying, Peter Tatchell, is make it easier for anyone throughout the world to come here to work, to fill labour shortages. There is no... we should not be giving priority to people from one sector of the world, seeing as part of the point of leaving the European Union was to make it equal across the world in terms of being able to come here.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, our economy has needs. We need labour. We've got skill shortages. I would be very happy to welcome anybody with the skills we need to this country. And I think that the very tough immigration policy we have at the moment is among a number of factors that is deterring people. I was really, really shocked to read these repeated reports in recent days about even EU citizens coming to visit family here in the UK and being interrogated like, you know, they were in front of the Stasi over their intentions and their bank balances and their jobs and so on, when we were promised that there would be continued easy access for European citizens to the UK for legitimate holidays and family reunions and indeed work applications. So to go back to the main point, I mean, yes, we need skills, and those skills, I'd be happy to take them from anywhere. The important thing is we need the skills. If someone from Africa or Asia or the Middle East or South America can offer them, let's take them.
Nadine, this is quite a quandary for the government, isn't it? Because they've started off with quite a tough immigration stance with their new point system. But of course, when the furlough system comes to an end later in the year, we all expect unemployment to go up, possibly not as much as we thought at the beginning, but I don't think anybody thinks it won't go up by quite a lot. Do we need to wait to maybe relax some of the immigration rules until we see what happens to unemployment later in the year?
So I'm kind of like, when it comes to immigration, I don't think it's always great to just see immigrants via what they can give economically. I think immigration is a beautiful thing. Like, my grandparents came over from Jamaica and I'm here, and the Windrush, etc. Obviously there was economic means there, but also Jamaicans have enriched British culture. So I think it's important to see immigration through the lens also of exchanging of cultures and that being a beautiful thing. I also think this point system seems very not really catering to the needs of the economy. So I don't think we should wait. I think we should just welcome people in that want to come and work here, want to make a home here. And I also really agree with the idea that, why would we prioritise people from Europe? I voted Remain, but I was sceptical about the European Union for various reasons. And one of which I found it quite illiberal to think, we'll have freedom of movement between these specific European countries. But then, if you're from a Commonwealth country, like my grandparents were from, or whatever, who have ties with the UK, you weren't allowed to do the same thing in the same way. So, that's my position on it. I don't think we should necessarily wait to see what happens with furlough. It's clear the need is there, and immigrants enrich our culture, so I'm all for more immigration.
But that's an argument for open borders, isn't it? And I think surely wouldn't we all agree that there has to be some sort of immigration system? We might all disagree as to what the numbers should be, but surely it has to be based, at least in part, on what different sectors of the economy need. That's the whole raison d'etre behind a point system, Nadine.
Yeah, I'm not like Phil. Open borders is a kind of, it's a kind of a difficult term to kind of pin down. My point is that there are different needs from different areas of the economy, but I don't think we should just have a country that runs on what are the economic benefits. The situation with the way child refugees have been treated and not being able to be reunited with their families. There are parts of the cultural life in the UK that are enriched by immigrants. But of course, there is the economic argument as well. And I do think that economically, socially and culturally, this country has always been richer for immigration. So I hope that it's made easier for people to come here.
Geoff Norcott.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was always going to be that Twitter and certain people on the Liberal left were going to seize on his comments. What's his surname again? I always think his name is Tim Weatherspoons. It's not.
I always think that too. Tim Martin.
Tim Martin. Look, I'm a bit predisposed to him at the moment because we went to North Norfolk at the weekend. It was the only place we could get a breakfast, and that is not sponsored content. That is a fact, Ian.
You didn't pop in. I was there too. You could have come and had a cup of tea at my place.
Mate, it would have been nice to get cup of tea and a sandwich somewhere. It was absolutely mobbed out. But I can see why kind of Remainy Twitter and social media love this, because it's kind of like catnip, isn't it? It seems on the face of it that he's saying something utterly paradoxical. But the truth is that for a lot of leading Brexiteers, a liberal immigration policy was something that was desirable and something that was wanted. It certainly was by me. The problem with I've always been welcome. I grew up in London, a diverse city. My issue was the absolutism of the EU project. Unlimited in perpetuity just seemed a bit absolutist to me. So I think a lot of Brexiteers would welcome this. But as you say, I think you make a very good point, and I didn't even think of it till you said it. Yeah, we've got this pinch point coming up later in the year with people going back into the labour market, and it might be sensible to wait till then. And I'll be honest, I don't have much of a problem with a service industry that has been getting by on paying people in the hospitality sector not too low, not enough money. And now we see a bit of competition in that sector. I'm not going to shed too many tears for that.
Well, that is a really good point. I was talking earlier in the news hour to our business correspondent, and he was saying that La Gavroche, a very posh restaurant, which Rory, I'm sure you've been to. I haven't actually been there, but I don't know if you have.
He's there now. I hope you're going to take us all there, Ian, to apologise for this classist.
I don't know what you think I get paid, but it wouldn't be enough to cover 5 people at La Gavroche. But I don't know what they pay their chefs. For all I know, they pay them really well. But as Geoff says, it's possibly unlikely that all chefs in London are paid brilliantly. Isn't this actually an opportunity to level up on wages, particularly people in hospitality who are often on minimum wage? Rory?
I think that's right. And this is a big issue in the States. I mean, Biden was hoping to put 1 million jobs on in January, and he's only put on 250,000 jobs. Been huge disappointment in the US. And part of that is, as he's increased support packages for people on low incomes, people are more and more reluctant to take very poorly paid jobs. In some ways, that's a good thing. But the problem is, how do you do that transition? And I think the answer isn't too black and white. The answer is that actually you need to begin driving up incomes. You need to get people paying properly. But what you can't do is suddenly starve all the supply of labour. It's going to be very difficult to turn this around. And some of these sectors, hospitality, etc., need labour now. And I think another thing is we have to be honest that not every Brexit voter is like Geoff, or even like the Wetherspoons boss. There were people who, of course, were worried about immigration. That was one of the issues that made people vote for Brexit. Maybe didn't make Geoff vote for Brexit, but definitely a lot of my Cumbrian constituents, they cared about it. And this is one of the binds that the Boris Johnson government's found itself in. They're trying to stretch very hard. It goes to a very awkward coalition between businesses that obviously want labour, maybe labour from many different parts of the world, and many people who voted for them who are not very keen on many more foreigners coming to the United Kingdom.
Sandra in Boreham Wood, you asked the question. Do you think Tim Martin was right?
Yes, I do. I think there are special cases which need consideration. I wanted to make mention of the fact that there are thousands and thousands of British host families who are no longer able to host an au pair, be it from Europe or anywhere else, as our government has denied that visa to young people. We're no longer able to participate in the au pair cultural exchange program, which is known throughout the world. We're not welcoming young people here. Certainly from Europe, they've always come to study English, to enjoy our family life here, and to help out with childcare. They provide flexible childcare to busy host families, hardworking families, nurses, doctors, teachers. There are thousands who have always hosted au pairs, and this has all stopped. And it's the government won't talk to us about it. Stopped completely. There is no means for an au pair to get here. The government talk about the youth mobility scheme, of which there are 9 countries eligible, but that precludes so many. Obviously, the Europeans don't come under that. There's just no way for these young people to come here and experience our lifestyle. It's so wrong. And they're not workers. Au pairs have never been workers. They really are cultural exchange. They earn pocket money of £100 a week, but they're given full board and lodging within the family. They have a very good lifestyle here for the short period that they are in the UK. They're not a drain on the economy, and it's really disgraceful that our government won't bring them into the fold and let them have a specific visa for a short stay here.
Well, I must admit, that's a new one on me. Sandra, thank you very much. Rory, were you aware of this? I mean, some people are going to say, oh, poor middle-class parents sort of having to have someone look after Tabitha and Oliver. But, I mean, Sandra makes a really good point there. This is a cultural thing, isn't it? It's kind of what Nadine was saying.
I think it's also partly about diversity and people. I mean, you're right. Any individual case, somebody can mock it. So, for example, we need people in the theatre industry in London. And people might say, well, I don't care about the theatre industry, or we don't care about au pairs, we don't care about farmers in East Anglia, or any number of don't care about the hotel in the Lake District. But put it all together, you're looking at a country which is losing out on a lot of incredibly dynamic young people. I'm like the rest of the panel. I don't care whether they come from Europe or where particularly they come from. It was one of the great glories of London in particular that we had some of the very brightest young people in the world coming in here to learn English, get jobs, not necessarily staying, some of them staying, moving on. And I think we're all going to be the worse off. We'll feel it in a million ways.
It ought not to be beyond the wit of the government to create an au pair visa scheme. I mean, I imagine most countries have one. Right, we're going to move on now. Sandra, thank you very much for your question. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's
84850.
It's 8:37 on LBC. Let me tell you who's on the cross-question panels next week, or a selection of the guests. Suzanne Moore, Jackie Smith, Sonia Soda, Barry Gardner, Damien Hines, Michael Rosen and Professor Linda Yu. They'll all be joining us on the panel along with several others. Let me reintroduce my panel to you tonight. The former Conservative Cabinet Minister Rory Stewart, Geoff Norcott, the political comedian and podcaster. He's got a very good podcast out called What Most People Think. Peter Tatchell, the human rights campaigner, and the journalist and broadcaster Nadine Batchelor-Hunt. Now, we are going to go where angels fear to tread now, and take a text from Terry in Darlington. Is Liz Truss right to urge all government departments to withdraw from Stonewall's Diversity Champions employment scheme due to their stance on transgender rights? Peter Tatchell, I'm going to come to you first on this.
Well, first of all, Stonewall, as an independent voluntary organisation, are entitled to have whatever policy they choose within the law. Secondly, the policy that Stonewall has is to support the trans community. The trans community, as we know, suffers a great deal of prejudice, discrimination and hate crime. And therefore, it's in the interest of all of us who are compassionate and caring to support that community and to ensure that they have respect, dignity and rights. And that is all that Stonewall is trying to do. It is trying to ensure that trans people in the workplace, through their diversity champion scheme, have respect and dignity in the workplace, that they're not harassed, not humiliated, not abused or subject to uncalled for insulting comments, that their gender, their true gender is respected. That's just simple decency. And I find this whole media storm against Stonewall really disturbing and quite worrying, because we need to stand with a community that is marginalized, vilified and demonized. We just need to stand with that community, and that is what Stonewall is doing.
Well, there are two accusations, aren't there? One, that Stonewall seems to have forgotten its LGB history and is just concentrating on the T. And you're right, it's a private organisation. It can do what it likes. And then there are also accusations that it is ignoring the rights of women. Now, I don't know what justification the government are coming up with for this, but those two things will be feeding into it, presumably.
Well, the first thing is that the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community have stood together for decades. This is nothing new. I was involved in the Gay Liberation Front in the early 1970s. Among our fellow activists were trans men and women. We organised protests to support trans rights way back in 1971. We featured trans issues in the Gay Liberation Front newspaper, Come Together. So Stonewall is doing nothing that is outside of the tradition of our movement. Secondly, on the point about respecting women's rights, of course we have to consider and be very mindful of the need for women to have security and safety, and I wholly support that. Don't think it's the right approach to suggest that trans women are predators who threaten women. This is like stereotypes and tropes around Jewish people, Muslim people, LGBT people, and so on. It is quite evil to demonize a whole community on the basis of what a very, very tiny number of misguided, wrong individuals may do. The vast majority of trans women are respectful of women. They pose no threat to them. They are holy. They are feminists alongside other women. The issue or the threat is from misogyny, not from trans women. And I just wish that all women, whatever their gender identity, should just seek their differences and work together to fight the misogyny that damages all of them. And when I was in the Gay Liberation Front, can I just say, when I was in the Gay Liberation Front, we worked very closely in support of the women's liberation movement. And feminists back in the early 1970s used to say, biology is not destiny. Now, some of them seem to be saying that biology is destiny. And I just think that's a really sad, tragic portrayal of the original ideas of the women's liberation movement.
Nadine Batchelor-Hunt, you've got respected commentators, journalists, authors, Suzanne Moore, Germaine Greer, J.K. Rowling, Julie Bindel, all would self-describe themselves as feminists. Yet they are concerned about the direction that Stonewall is going in. I mean, I don't want to put words into their mouths, but I have read comments from each of them that are certainly concerned about the rights of women being undermined by some of the agenda that Stonewall are engaging in. Do you have any concerns along those lines?
The rights of trans women are the rights of women. I don't see them as different. I think the way in which life manifests itself for, a cis woman versus a trans woman obviously is different, but their end goals are the same. And I do more broadly find this constant debate that continues, just never ending, about trans women in the media. It does concern me, because we're talking about a very small proportion of the population who experience so much marginalisation, so much oppression. Suicide rates are obscenely high within these groups. At a time when we should be extending support and solidarity, it's turned into this weird culture. I mean, we saw it a lot with BLM. Unfortunately, there are certain issues that enter the mainstream that are just turned into a political football. And I worry that, this has been, I don't worry, it has been happening with trans women, and particularly it's LGBT History Month. I hope we can just focus on the clear issues. Majority of women, if you ask the average woman, are they happy with trans women going into women's only bathrooms? Yes. The average woman is not hugely concerned about the issues that are kept bandied around in the media. And I just hope we can just focus on the people that are really struggling with marginalisation and bigotry, and away from these incendiary kind of culture wars that we see coming out of politics.
Geoff Norcott, you've talked about these issues on your podcast. What do you make of what the government are doing with regard to Stonewall?
Well, first up, there's an issue just with something that Peter and Nadine have both said. I think you feel like you made a point about respected commentators and political thinkers of the left that are raising concerns. So do you think that they're raising them? This goes to Nadine and Peter. Because they're bigots, because they want to demonise in the way that you think? Because it seems unlikely with some of those personalities that they're just doing it to be mischievous at best and to make people's lives worse. Look, I'm not playing the kind of straight white male exemption card here. I don't fully understand all the discourse around this, but it certainly seems unlikely to me that some of those figures are just doing this to be exclusionary.
Well, can I answer that and say
Peter?
that
okay.
I'm sure that all these feminists who are trans-critical are sincere and genuine in their beliefs. I have great respect for them in many, many ways, and I've worked with many of them for decades. But I think they are mistaken on this issue, because they are, as Nadine has said, they're raising a spectre of a problem that doesn't really exist. So if you look at lots of women's groups, even rape crisis groups, they have been accepting trans women for many, many years. And in most cases, with the agreement not only of the staff, but of the clients. I recently spoke to a woman who works in a women's centre, and she was saying that some years ago, I think about 6 years ago, the issue of trans women in their women's centre arose. Their response was to put it to a vote of the staff and a vote of all the women attending the centre. And I think she said the vote was unanimous by both the staff and the clients to accept trans women, and there's never been a problem since. So I think it's an imaginary fear. It's a fear that is understandable, but it's not borne out by facts, not borne out by evidence.
Okay, Rory, a quick answer from you if you could.
Yeah, very quick answer. I encountered this as a prisons minister. So I think part of the secret is that a lot of this depends on context. I think these are difficult, in some ways, new issues that we need to work through as a society. But one of the challenges I faced as prison minister is that one of our prisoners, who was biologically a man, had been put into a women's prison and had assaulted someone in a women's prison. And so I found myself, as you can imagine, stuck right in the middle of what Nadine has called the culture war. Between, on the one hand, people saying, what on earth is this person doing in the prison? And then when I tried to remove them from the prison and put in stricter rules about biological men going into women's prisons, and prisons are a very, very intense, difficult environment. I think I basically agree with Peter. Many of these cases are quite small and exceptional. But there are situations like prison where I think you need to be quite thoughtful about the way in which you approach these things, I'm immediately accused of being a transphobe. So I think we're all learning, right? We're all getting there. But broadly speaking, I'm probably closer to the Peter side of this.
So you don't think the government was really right to urge all government departments to withdraw from cooperation from Stonewall?
No, I don't think that's a useful direction to go in. I mean, Ministry of Justice, when I turned up, I was, of course, surprised when I became a minister, but all the posters going into the lifts were about celebrating sexuality and diversity instead of focusing on standards in prisons. But over time, I became actually much more sympathetic towards it. And I think there are many other arguments we should be having in our society. And I think educating people in that way is perfectly reasonable. And I think civil servants could continue to do that. And there are many more important problems we need to be getting on with, like educating children who missed out on school during COVID.
Geoff, you wanted to come in?
Can I just add something quickly? I think obviously it is very important that any woman, trans or non-trans, who goes into a rape crisis centre or a women's centre is vetted, and that's what they do. All these centres vet the clients who come into their centre. And if someone is identified as a trans woman and they discover that they have a history of violence or sexual assault on women, then I think quite clearly a different approach has to be taken. And I think in those circumstances, it would not be right for that person to be admitted to a women's centre where they have, clear evidence that they have committed serious crimes against women. But that is a small number, and they should be the exception. The rest of trans women should not be penalised on account of those quite bad wrongdoers.
Okay, well, some very thoughtful comments in our answers on that. It is one of those subjects that I think a lot of people are shying away from now because you feel one word out of place. And I mean, I did what I thought was a quite balanced tweet on this issue the other day and was just descended on from both sides. And I thought, well, I'm never going to do that again, which is a shame because you kind of want to get involved in the argument. Just a reminder that if you miss Cross Question on any particular evening, the podcast is up by 11 o'clock. And of course, you can watch again on Global Player or on the LBC YouTube channel.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 8:52 on LBC. Someone's just texted in to say, what is Rory Stewart doing now? Well, he's actually on Cross Question. But Rory, you left Parliament in 2019. What are you up to now? I read somewhere you lived in the United States for a bit. I don't know if you're still there.
Yeah, I'm teaching at Yale University, and I'm about to move to Jordan.
Get you.
Where I'm going to work with Syrian refugees on the northern Jordanian-Syrian border, restoring a historic site and trying to create some incomes.
Well, that's a very worthy thing to do. I'd love to talk to you when you're doing that. Maybe we can get you back on the programme live from Syria. That would be fantastic. Right, let's go to our next question. Chris is in Richmond. Hello, Chris.
Hello, good evening, panel. Does the panel think that Boris Johnson's decision to go for a new national flagship is more another example of Boris Johnson's vanity projects, or is it something that we really need to do to get over COVID?
You didn't actually mention the words royal yacht there, but I think that's what you meant, isn't it?
Royal yacht, sorry.
Geoff Norcott, do we need a royal yacht to get all of our spirits back up to entice foreign business people to invest money in this country?
Yeah, well, I think opponents of the government and of these kind of things would often talk about something being symbolic, but symbolic things matter. They matter in so many different ways, and in terms of trying to secure trade and, looking outwards globally now as we are post-Brexit, I don't have an issue necessarily with this sort of thing. The problem's going to come is, the cost of these things tend to spiral. So whatever the cost we're quoted for initially, it's like Wembley Stadium where you can double that. And then once you're trying to calibrate that against other things that we need to spend money on, I don't want to keep going back to disadvantaged kids that need tutoring, that will be when the difficulty comes. So it's a delicate political argument to make. I'm not sure Boris Johnson is definitely got the skills to make it. It's a hard thing to sell at this point in time. But I think, in terms of drumming up trade, I don't mind investing a bit to make a lot.
Nadine Batchelor-Hunt, what do you make of this?
So, I mean, you probably predict what I'm going to make of it. I think there's things we should be spending.
Surely not.
be coming out of a pandemic, like the evictions are likely to just going to skyrocket because the evictions ban is lifting. You've got kids that need more schooling, need more money for schooling. You've got food banks running out of control. There are so many deep socioeconomic issues in this country. We talk about patriotism. For me, patriotism manifests itself as making sure our kids are fed and clothed and taught, making sure that our citizens have places to live and not to live on the streets. These are the things that not only are the moral, ethical, and the duty of the state, but also will help the economy. If we've got an economy of people that aren't living in a massive rich-poor divide, that's going to help us all anyway. So no, I don't think we should be spending money like that, and I do think it is a bit of a vanity project.
Peter Tatchell, I don't know what the economic case for this is, but let's assume that there is one and that it can be almost proved that for spending 200 million within 5 years, we'd get £1 billion back to fund all the things that Nadine was saying there. Would you support it?
Well, quite clearly, spending £200 million on a new royal yacht is not going to generate a single pound of new trade at all.
Why? Well, the old one
did. It's the negotiators who are going to do that. And I would love to send someone like Rory Stewart, who's been a great envoy for Britain in these various roles. He would do a far better job for a tiny, minuscule amount of the cost.
He's basically saying, Rory, he's saying that you're cheap.
I'm very cheap. Let me come in and defend the idea that sometimes it's worth spending money on things which are symbolic, but I think there are more exciting symbols. So if you gave me £200 million, I'd love to spend it on investing on Whitehaven on the Cumbrian coast and the port there. I'd love to spend it on planting the biggest forest in Britain in the Greenbelt. I'd love to spend it on thinking through the way that you could regenerate Hadrian's Wall as a tourist destination. I think there are exciting things you can do with £200 million, which can make a real difference, and not everything in government needs to be about the last pound and pence. I mean, the French are very good at spending money on things which are, about culture and about ideas. But I think if we're looking for things, we could find things in Northern England which are more inclusive, more exciting, get more people involved, and where you could create something beautiful. National parks could be another example. But I think there's room for beauty in the world, but I think beauty probably better in trees than in boats today.
But boats do look... expensive boats do look really cool, though, Rory. I mean, can we just make that clear?
Kids being fed and clothed and stuff, that's even cooler, I think.
True.
I was going to say we have four beautiful people on the panel tonight. But
I want to disagree with Nadine for a second, because I think she's making a very powerful point, but it's a difficult point in politics. That in the end, you can always spend more and more money on basic things, but there has to be a bit of space and a bit of room to do things which are going to last for future generations. And there's got to be room for regeneration and buildings and beauty and museums. And that's part of what actually makes our life worth living. So I think the challenge for a government is defending a bit of budget for culture, but not doing things like royal yachts, which undermine the sort of credibility of it, but keeping it for things like, Newcastle, for example, the entire regeneration around the Tyne has been the most spectacular investment. Gateshead Centre and things, Baltic Centre, really good examples of the way in which you can spend quite a lot of money on doing things that really make a difference to people's lives.
Nadine, final word to you.
Yeah, I just think one of the things I don't think we talk about enough in the media is how socioeconomically divided this country is right now, how high poverty levels are. I think 1 in 4 children live in poverty. So again, we don't have to spend every last penny on things like that, but I think we should be spending far more. And as we go back to the start of the programme, we're spending £50 a head on kids to get back from, to catch up from the pandemic. It's just not enough, and you could just look abroad for that. So I think, you don't have to count every penny, but when we're in a situation this bad, I think we do need to be thinking about where we could direct the money that's going to have the best impact and morally the best case.
Okay, final text question from Kevin in Southampton. Pin your ears back for this one. Does Keir Starmer's pathetic welling up on television last night show he's not up to the job of Prime Minister? He was on Piers Morgan's Life Stories, which nobody listening to this programme will have been watching because they will have been listening to me, obviously. Geoff Norcott, there's nothing wrong with a few tears, is there?
Well, no, not really. I was surprised that he was so coy on the drugs thing. I mean, if you think back a couple of years ago, Rory and the Conservative leadership candidates, it was like the first chapter of a Hunter S. Thompson novel. He should have gone there. He should have doubled down. So you did opium. Guess what I did in the Himalayas? So I think. Look.
Well, according to Guido Fawkes, he did LSD.
I think Keir Starmer is a good bloke, but we already knew that. My big question is what the Labour Party needs right now a good bloke? I suspect not. I suspect they need somebody that can face down the hard left of the party and the problems with the image perception that they generate. So, yeah, Keir Starmer's a nice guy. He's a decent guy. But let's not forget, he hasn't been in politics that long. And I think probably at this point they need a more experienced campaigner like Andy Burnham.
Rory Stewart, nice guys don't always come first, do they?
That's very, very, very kind of you, if you mean that I'm a nice guy.
I do.
Geoff's point about political experience is hugely important. And I think it's a strange thing in politics that you can be, like Keir Starmer, hugely bright and capable, but sometimes not have those political instincts. And I'm going to follow Geoff on saying there is something very special about Andy Burnham. I noticed when I was running to be Mayor of London against Sadiq Khan that Sadiq hadn't made much impact on homelessness, and Andy Burnham had halved it in about a year. I mean, he really seems to be somebody who's good at the operational business of politics, as well as working out the real genius of it, which is somehow making big, simple, attractive messages and getting stuff done. So Andy Burnham's really, I think he's the person to watch.
Okay, Nadine?
I've met Andy Burnham actually, and I do think he would be a really great Labour leader. I think with Keir Starmer, so I watched Keir Starmer.
Another white male.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to we're in politics with its big personalities. We need people that have established themselves, and like Andy Burnham with the whole King in the North stuff did establish himself as a big personality. Boris Johnson is a big personality. I mean, you go to America, Joe Biden has big policies, big ideas. We need politicians that are outspoken, that have a kind of brand, and I think Andy Burnham kind of has that, from the North, like stood up for Manchester. And I don't think Keir Starmer has that brand. And I think the live stories thing was, I think, very interesting and showed a different side to Keir Starmer. And I think it's absolutely fine to cry about serious things, be it on television or not. But I do think now with politics, we just had Trump, you would need big personalities and people that it's clear what they stand for when they talk to you. And I don't think we've got that with Starmer.
Peter Tatchell, we're running out of time. Very brief, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think Labour's problems are much bigger than the leader. The rot is in the party itself and its inability to marry radical policies with common sense, with pragmatic, achievable policies. And you go back to 1945 or even the Harold Wilson years, you saw this leadership there reflecting a wider party that had both radicalism to make a big difference to underlying fundamental problems, but also presented in a way that made common sense and that ordinary people could relate to.
Thank you very much indeed to all four of you. Rory Stewart, Nadine Batchelor-Hunt, Geoff Norcott and Peter Tatchell will join us again for another Cross Question next Monday at 8. Coming up in a moment, single Brits will need a pension pot of £123,000 just for basics when they retire, and as much as £305,000 to be able to take holidays, according to research from Which. So staycations all round, I guess. The last time we did a phone-in on pensions, I said at the end of it, who ever knew pensions could be so interesting? I think I'm going to say that at the end of the next hour as well. It's 9:03.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.